Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Harshita Thakur, MDS in Oral Medicine and Radiology, and a proud faculty member of Odont Academy of Learning. Hope you're all keeping safe and hope you're all viewing the videos uploaded by Odont Academy of Learning. Okay, so today I thought why not revise in the form of question and answers or MCQs of the two topics that I have covered up till now, which is principle of radiographic interpretation as well as maxillary space infection. So let's go on. Okay. And I have these set of questions along with MCQs. In case you want to pause it and think of the answer, you can always do that. I'll be discussing it then and there. So let's start, guys. All the best. Okay, so the first question is, radiographs are of no help in diagnosis of option A, cementoma, option B, luxation of teeth, option C, acute alveolar abscess, and option 4, impacted canines. So what I would suggest is, once you read a question, please read it twice or thrice until and unless, no matter how easy you think the question is, until and unless it's not impregnated in your mind, please keep reading the question again and again. Okay, only once you're clear and have understood the question properly, then you go ahead with the ticking of the answers, right? So they are asking for the diagnosis of a radiograph which is of no help. Okay, absolutely no help. So we have cementoma. Now we know that cementoma appears slightly radio opaque. So it can be a help when it comes to diagnosis in a radiograph. Next is luxation of teeth. So what is luxation? Basically, it is partial removal of the tooth or avulsion of the tooth. So we know that the tooth is attached to the bone via PDL membrane. Okay. So probably there is a widening of PDL membrane. Third option is acute alveolar abscess. Now it is acute. That means sudden in onset and an abscess. Now we know abscess always occurs radiolucent. And finally, we have an impacted canine, which is always visible in a maxillary or a mandibular radiograph of the anterior region. Okay, so when moving on to the options, cementoma, obviously we can see the diffuse radio opacity, and the radio opacity is not hindering or interfering with the other anatomic structure which is in close proximity to it. In this case, we can see the PDL membrane, this thin radiolucent line which I'm drawing. Okay, it is intact. Okay, and so is this lamina dura. So this is a cementoma which we can diagnose with radiograph. So obviously our option B, option A is ruled out. Coming to luxation of teeth, like I explained, can you appreciate this widening of PDL on one side? So this is also diagnosable in case of a radiograph. Option B is ruled out. Third is acute alveolar abscess. Now the term acute, that means it has just happened and short-lived. And we know that in a radiograph, we can never see any short-lived or acute changes. So the correct option is option C. And impacted canines, obviously, we know that it is easily diagnosed in anterior region, like I said. Moving on, the second question. Radiographic image of a malignant tumor. So the catchword here is a malignant tumor. Let's see the options. First is a distinct sclerotic border. Okay. Second is geographic bone destruction. Third is sunburst appearance, and all of the above. Now, usually what happens is whenever we see the option of all of the above, we think that it must be all of the above. Let's tick mark this. Okay, but always, like I said initially, always read the question until and unless you do not understand the exact meaning of it and the options too. Okay, so it is asking for a malignant tumor. What is malignant? Which is spreading, and tumor or your neoplasm. Okay, so it is a rapidly spreading tumor. The first option which says is sclerotic border. Now, if we go back to my first presentation, which was Principle of Radiographic Interpretation, I said the term sclerosis. That means the bone is being formed in a slow growing cyst or a tumor. Okay. So it is a malignant tumor. That means it is rapidly spreading. So it is not slow growing. So sclerosis will not take place. That means there will be no peripheral bone formation. Okay. If there is no peripheral bone formation, that is the sign of a malignant tumor. So option A is ruled out. Second is geographic bone destruction. Geographic bone destruction, as the name suggests, it is only in that one particular spot, and this is also slow growing. Okay, so because it is a slow growing and localized, we know it is not malignant tumor. Sunburst appearance, when we think of, the first thing that comes to our mind is it is characteristic of osteosarcoma, okay, which is a malignant tumor. So we can conclude that option C is the right option. It cannot be all of the above because option A and option B is completely contradicting option C. Okay, so sunburst appearance is the right answer. Here I have put up this photo just to explain you sclerosis, okay, which is like an outer rim of radio opacity, which we can appreciate. It is just a peripheral bone formation in a slow growing lesion. And this here is sunburst appearance, which is seen in osteosarcoma. And in jaws, of course, it has affinity towards mandible, and it is also seen in our long bones. Okay, moving on. The third question. In early cases, multiple myeloma presents with no radiographic sign, hair on end appearance, punched out lesion, and step ladder appearance. Now, again, we read the question in early cases. That means it is acute. So keeping the first question in mind, we directly know that it is definitely, the answer is no radiographic sign because it is an early case. However, in the later stages or advanced stages, we know that multiple myelomas, the characteristic is punched out lesion. Okay, hair on end appearance we usually see in thalassemia, and step ladder appearance is nothing but the bony trabeculae, which is seen in the posterior part of mandible. Okay, so sorry. Okay, moving on. Next question. Loss of lamina dura is observed in hypothyroidism, hypoparathyroidism, hyperthyroidism, and hyperparathyroidism. Okay, now loss of lamina dura. That means there is loss of basically our bone, okay, which is surrounding the tooth. Now there are two hypos and two hyper, again contradicting. Okay, so usually we know that thyroid, what does it do? It causes increased metabolism. So if there is loss of lamina dura, there is increased activity. It cannot be hypo, it has to be hyper, right? Now, when it comes to hyperthyroidism or hyperparathyroidism, the answer here is hyperparathyroid hormone. Okay, hyperparathyroid hormone is more, which is causing this loss of lamina dura. In fact, it causes generalized loss of lamina dura. In hyperthyroidism, there is loss of lamina dura, but it usually first starts with thinning of the lamina dura. Okay, the lamina dura gets thinned down and then it causes loss, but immediate loss or loss at a faster rate is seen in our hyperparathyroidism. Okay, so here I've put the picture in where we can see there is generalized loss of lamina dura, if you appreciate here. Okay, and also the bone which we see, it appears slightly hazy. Okay, so this haziness is defined as ground glass appearance. Okay, we call it GG, ground glass appearance. So this is the normal glass. This is a ground glass. Okay, so there is loss of density or reduced density of bone, which gives it ground glass appearance along with loss of lamina dura. Right? Next, a thin radiolucent line which just give me a minute, which follows the root line of X-ray. What part is it? Now this is a very easy question that I have put. First is lamina dura, second is nutrient canal, third is pulp, and fourth is periodontal ligament. So it is asking for a thin and a radiolucent line. So the catchword here is lucent. Now lamina dura we know is a radio opaque structure. Okay, so this gets ruled out again. Okay, nutrient canal, yes, it is radiolucent because it is a canal. Okay, next is pulp. Again, what is it? It is a radiolucent structure, so we can consider it. And finally, periodontal ligament. Again, it is a radiolucent structure, so we can consider it. But the question is, it follows the root line of the tooth. Okay, so when it says the root line, immediately the picture must come to your mind, okay, of any tooth or in a radiograph. So we know that this is the pulp. Okay, we have our enamel here. This is the dentine, which is slightly low density when compared to enamel. Then this radiolucent line here is the pulp. Following the root line of the tooth, the radiolucent line here is the PDL space. And here where I've marked the arrows, these are the nutrient canals. Nutrient canals are usually on the apices of the teeth. Okay, so our answer, correct answer would be PDL space is the thin radiolucent line. Usually out of excitement or out of overconfidence, we miss out on the word radiolucent. We think it's a thin radio opaque line and students usually mark lamina dura. Okay, so always I'm repeating it time and again. Please read the question properly. Moving on, next question. Minimal dentinal destruction. To get evidence on a radiograph should be how many microns? Now this is a from the textbook question. 30 microns, 40 microns, 20 microns, 200 microns. Now this, there is no basic logic behind it. You have to know the value. You have to mug up the value, and the value is 40 microns. Okay. Next question. Radiographically, the sequestrum formed in osteomyelitis is more opaque than healthy bone, as opaque as healthy bone, less opaque than healthy bone, or none of the above. So sequestrum here, what does it indicate? What is sequestrum? It is nothing but a dead bone or a devitalized bone. Okay, or we can call it an avascularized bone in our dental or medical language. Okay, so because it is devitalized, avascular, and it is more denser than the normal bone, because of its hyperdensity, this will definitely be more opaque than healthy bone. So automatically this becomes the correct answer. Okay, next question. Loss of lamina dura and ground glass appearance indicates. Now we know we just did hyperparathyroidism as loss of lamina dura as well as ground glass appearance. But most of these radiographic features, they coincide with each other. Okay, so we have to know the characteristic appearance, radiographic appearance of that particular disease. Okay, so when it comes to, okay, so the options are Paget's disease, fibrous dysplasia, Caffey's disease, and osteomalacia. Okay, now first when we come to Paget's disease, usually the characteristic feature that we know is cotton wool appearance, which strikes our mind. Okay, next is fibrous dysplasia. We know that it is called as orange peel or ground glass appearance. Okay, so we can consider this option. Third is Caffey's disease. Okay, Caffey's disease is also called as infantile cortical hyperostosis. And finally, we have osteomalacia, in which there is reduced density of the bone. Okay, so cotton wool is this, that means this is Paget's disease. This, the density seems less. Okay, so this becomes our osteomalacia. And this is hyperostosis. Can you see the cortex here is slightly thickened? So this is Caffey's disease. Another important thing of Caffey's disease is it is usually seen in infants or babies. Okay, so that happens, and there is bilateral enlargement of our cortical plate, usually of the mandible. So fibrous dysplasia is suitable here, okay, because it has ground glass appearance and there is generalized loss of lamina dura. Okay, when compared to Paget's, because Paget's, even though it starts with ground glass appearance, it usually becomes, in the later stages, it becomes amorphous and it gives a cotton wool appearance. So between these two, fibrous dysplasia is the correct answer. Okay, next, salt and pepper appearance is seen in IOPA radiograph of thalassemia, periodontal abscess, Sjogren's syndrome, and osteoporosis. So salt and pepper appearance is nothing but diffuse radio opacity and there is radiolucency. Okay. So thalassemia, yes, we can consider, but thalassemia, you think that there can be hair on end appearance as well. That is absolutely right. Okay. So thalassemia has both hair on end appearance as well as salt and pepper appearance in the advanced stages when some of the trabeculae disappears. Next is periodontal abscess. Abscess, we know, does not have salt and pepper appearance. It is completely either there is radiolucency or there is very slight radio opacity in the margin of or the border of this radiolucency. Okay, next is Sjogren's syndrome. Now Sjogren's syndrome, yes, it shows salt and pepper appearance, but it shows in the cyanogram. Okay, so had the question been salt and pepper effect or appearance seen in a cyanogram of parotid gland, it would, the correct answer would have been Sjogren's syndrome. But because it is IOPA radiograph, we say that it is thalassemia. Okay, osteoporosis, again there will be diffuse or decreased density, and that is the characteristic sign of it. Okay, so it does not show salt and pepper appearance. Okay, so this is again our this is an example of our osteoporosis in which there is decreased trabeculation. Okay, there is decreased density. It gives absolutely no sign of salt and pepper appearance. This here is salt and pepper effect as seen in MRI of the parotid gland. Okay, in Sjogren's syndrome, you can see some part are white, some are black. So that is hyperintense and hypointense lesion effect, sorry. And this here is salt and pepper appearance, wherein you can see the radio opacity somewhere, and then here it is again fading, and again it is becoming radio opaque here. Okay, so this gives a salt and pepper appearance seen in thalassemia. Next question. Which of the following helps in distinguishing an osseous neoplasm and a cyst on an X-ray? Okay. So the question here is very simple. Distinguishing feature between a bony neoplasm and a cyst. Okay. So we know that cysts are usually slow growing. Okay. Keep that in mind. Now, so what helps in distinguishing? The size, the shape, the peripheral bone formation, or the location. Okay, so the size, it can be more or large or very minute in case of neoplasm as well as cyst. Okay, so size is rolled out. When it comes to shape, it can take any shape. It can take well-defined or ill-defined, or an oval shape, or a circular round shape. Okay, so that is not a criteria for distinguishing between neoplasm and cyst. Peripheral bone formation, yes. Okay, why is it so? Because the cyst is slow growing, so the cortex of the cyst appears more thicker. Okay, even though it can be non-uniform cortex, but a cortical plate will always be there surrounding a cyst, which is not there in a neoplasm. So one of the distinguishing feature is a peripheral bone formation. Okay, and finally we have the location, which can be of a cyst or a tumor, doesn't matter. It can be in mandibular, let's say mandibular posterior region, can have an ameloblastoma, it can have an OKC, correct? So that is not a distinguishing feature. So in this case, we can see the peripheral bone here, the cortical plate here is slightly thickened. Okay, even though it is absent here, but it is present in the remaining part, which usually we do not see in an osseous neoplasm, right? Okay, next question. Which of the following is not a primary maxillary space? So now we have moved on to the next topic of maxillary space infection. Please read these words: not, except, all in, but. Okay, so these are the questions which most of us go wrong, because we tend to overlook these types of words, okay, which actually forms the main question. Okay, so here it says is not a primary maxillary space. Infratemporal space, infraorbital space, temporal space, and retrozygomatic space. Okay, so infratemporal space is also called as, what is it? Infratemporal. It is also called as retrozygomatic space. Okay, so now that we know this, we know that these two is definitely not the answer. Okay, next, infraorbital space. It is also called as canine space infection. Okay, which is a primary maxillary space infection. And finally, we have temporal space. Okay, so temporal is divided into your sub and superficial and deep temporal space, which is a secondary space infection. Okay, so the correct answer is temporal space. Okay, next, palatal abscess most commonly results from infection of, that means the swelling in the palatal region usually occurs from which tooth is the basic question. Does it occur from canine? Does it occur from laterals, centrals, or premolar? Now think of the anatomy of the tooth. Usually the maxillary lateral incisor, what happens is the bone, first of all, the maxillary root is slightly curving towards the palatal side. Okay, and the bone is thinner towards the maxillary lateral incisor root. okay, than the buccal side of it or than the labial side of it, because of its close proximity towards the palatal bone region. The infection usually takes place in the palatine region. Okay, so the correct answer is maxillary lateral incisors. Next question. Most common serious complication that occurs following surgery in maxillary central incisor. So they are asking for a complication. Iritis, cellulitis, periapical abscess, cavernous sinus thrombosis. Whenever you see this cavernous sinus thrombosis associated with the anterior region infection, please tick mark it blindly, because cavernous sinus thrombosis results from a danger area of face, which is our region in the upper lip. Okay, so any infection on the upper lip, nose, including our teeth of the anterior region can cause cavernous sinus thrombosis, which is a serious complication. Okay, so correct answer is option D. Moving on. Infection from maxillary first molar drains into. Okay, so infection from maxillary first molar. Which space does it drain into? Submandibular space. Now, submandibular space is in the mandible region. How can a maxillary first molar drain into a mandibular area? That too as a primary infection. So we rule this out first only. Second is infratemporal space or retrozygomatic or behind the zygomatic space. We can consider it. Buccal space, it is on maxillary first molar. That's where the buccal space start. We can consider it. Infraorbital space, not really, except for the roots of the maxillary molar root we can consider, but the chances are very less. Okay, so we are left with infratemporal space and buccal space. Because of the close proximity, again, it is the maxillary first molar. So without a doubt, the correct answer is buccal space. Infratemporal space, usually maxillary third molars. Okay, third molar is what will cause the infratemporal space infection, right? Okay. Next, there is a swelling. Okay, so this is a patient-based question. Please concentrate and read properly. Now, there is a swelling in a patient with respect to the maxillary lateral incisor. Since the last 48 hours, so it's been 2 days, the swelling is hot and palpable and it rebounds on pressure. Rebound means if you press something and release it, it will fall back. The treatment of choice. So basically, they are asking for the treatment of a space infection. Now we can consider it a canine space infection because of the localization of the question. In the question, only the localized area is mentioned, which is the maxillary lateral incisor, and it is hot and palpable. Okay, so the infection is spreading fast and deep. So what is the treatment? Do we incise and drain? Do we give antibiotic coverage? Do we do antibiotics and apply heat, or do we aspirate? Okay, so incision and drainage can be given yes. Antibiotic coverage can be given yes. Antibiotics, this is I'm so sorry, and heat therapy, no. Why would we? I mean, of course, we can give heat, but that wouldn't be our treatment of choice immediately. And finally, aspiration. Okay, so no. Why would we aspirate anything? There's nothing really stuck that we have to remove. Okay, so the two choices we must consider are incision and drainage and antibiotic coverage. Okay, now if there is swelling that is hot, it is palpable, it is rebounding on pressure, that means the swelling is quite bulky. We can give antibiotics initially, but what happens is, because of the tremendous edema or the fluid which is comprising of pus and bacteria, we can give antibiotic, but it will not be as effective because we must always do culture test of the pus, okay, to make sure that we are giving a narrow or a broad spectrum antibiotic. Basically the antibiotic which will act on the microbe. It can be aerobic, it can be anaerobic, we are not aware. Okay, so before we do the culture test, it is best option to do incision and drainage. So first is, of course, we will relieve all the pressure and the pus and edematous fluid will come out. Okay, so the swelling of the patient will reduce. That is one advantage. Second advantage is, if we remove this pressure, the fluid, what happens is the antibiotic that we give as a secondary approach, this will be more efficient. This will act better. Okay, so in cases like this, always go in for incision and drainage, followed by antibiotic coverage. Okay, so it is 1 and then 2, but correct option is incision and drainage. Next question. Infratemporal space infection manifests as all except. Okay, so here the keyword is except. Limitation of mouth opening or basically trismus, swelling in front of ear on affected site, proptosis of eye, obliterated nasolabial fold. Now it is the intratemporal space, that means it is our retrozygomatic space. Okay, it is just below the ear. So limitation of mouth opening, yes, can occur. Swelling in front of the ear, the site is that, so obviously swelling will be on that side. Proptosis of eyes will occur. Okay, there will be, basically proptosis is nothing but bulging out of the eyes because of the swelling which is in close proximity to it, also can cause this bulging out. Obliteration of the nasolabial fold we usually see in canine space infection, can also be seen in buccal space, but it is too far-fetched for an infratemporal space. Please refer back to my video, you will understand why. Okay, so obliteration of the nasolabial fold is the correct answer. In cases like this, always picturize the swelling. It says intratemporal, please picturize the swelling. Okay, where can it spread? What can be its extent? So you will automatically know these answers. Okay, moving on. Which of the main factor decides whether an infection will spread to the vestibule or it will spread to the palate? First is level of virulence. Second option is patient's host defense mechanism. Third is environmental factors. And fourth is path of least resistance. So it is telling us, or the question is, where will the infection spread? Whether it will go deep to the vestibule or it will go to the palate. If so, it chooses either. Why would it go to that particular area? That is the question. Level of virulence, no. Level of virulence is nothing but ability for it to cause the infection. Okay, so level of virulence, if the virulence is more, it doesn't mean it will spread only to vestibule or only to palate. No. Okay, so this option is ruled out. This will actually tell us the intensity of the infection. Second is patient's host defense mechanism. Again, not a factor to stop the infection from spreading into an area. Okay, patient's host defense mechanism will again either reduce the symptom, or if the patient is immunocompromised, it will be more exaggerated response. Third is environmental factors can be considered. That means closer proximity of the root of the offending tooth to the palatal region, or maybe it is more deeper, it can go to the vestibule, can be considered. But path of least resistance, that means wherever there is less resistance or less obstruction, the infection will easily flow there because there is less stoppage. Okay, so wherever there is less stoppage, the person, let's say you take the example of a policeman catching a thief. Okay, so it is not necessary for the thief to go out of the window only. What if the policeman are standing at the window? The thief will go probably, you know, one of the back door is empty, so he can go from there. Okay, so that is the path of least resistance. That means wherever there is least obstruction or less, wherever it can flow easily, it will go there. Okay, so the correct answer is path of least resistance. That's where the infection will spread. So it can spread to vestibule, it can spread to palate. Okay, but if in case the antibodies or our IgAs and IgGs are more in the vestibule, let's say, it will go through palate. If it is more in palate, then it will go to vestibule. Okay, so moving on, the last question is cavernous sinus thrombosis can occur due to spread of odontogenic infection via tissue spaces, via lymphatics, via hematogenous spread, or all of the above. Okay, now you must think carefully. Cavernous sinus thrombosis, that means we know what it is. There is a clot or a thrombi which is formed. Okay, and it is gone and it sat in the sinus. How does this happen via a tooth infection? Does it happen via tissue spaces? Does it go invade all the tissues and then breach everything and go to the sinus? No, it scientifically it's not making any sense. Okay, so tissue spaces is ruled out. Lymphatic routes, no, it does not go to the lymph node, sit there, you know, cause the lymph node to reduce, cause the lymphatic cells to reduce, no, and then cause the infection, no. So lymphatic route is also ruled out. Please remember the valveless facial vessels that we talked about, which is the hematogenous route that causes spread of this infection into the sinus, and the sinus causes, and there is thrombi formation in that sinus. So hematogenous spread is the correct answer. Okay, it is not all of the above, right? So with this, we finish our discussion on the topics that I've covered, which is maxillary space infections, only the primary spaces, and the radiographic interpretation. Okay, the principles of radiographic interpretation. Hope you have understood. If you have any doubts, you can please write it on the comments below. We will make sure we get back to you and answer. And do like, share, and subscribe our channel. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Stay safe.